I'm here with Command Chief Warrant Officer Phyllis Wilson, and she is going to be explaining a lot to us about physical and mental fitness, and also the question that I've been kind of burning about is, tell us about warrant officers. But tell us about your involvement with the physical and mental fitness of the soldiers.
Well, all soldiers should both strive to be both physically fit and mentally fit, but the mental fitness is one of those more obscure and somewhat sublime issues for us to deal with. Physical fitness, we have programs in place that are very easy for every soldier and family member to understand. Physically, obviously, I think that if we strive to do the physical fitness pieces that we need to meet our career, also then parlays into the mental fitness aspect of it as well. So physically, getting out there and doing something 3-4 times a week, whether it's walking fast, if that's as good as it gets for you, or going out and doing some running and some additional cardio type of pieces, I think you'll find that you'll rest better, which then obviously will feed over into your mental fitness. But if you can involve your family in those aspects as well, go out for a walk after dinner, things like that, I think everybody will pay off. And we don't do dinner at a table anymore, so you might be able to have a conversation with a family member if you go out for an afternoon or evening walk with them.
It seems that so many people are in infantry battalions or infantry companies, and those people are going to be out having running and drills as part of their regular training. Is that part of everybody's training to get physical exercise, or are people pretty much on their own?
Well, in the Army Reserve, because most soldiers only go to drill one weekend a month, and so that leaves 28, 29 days a month that they're on their own. But as part of the Army profession, we expect them, they don't get paid extra to do the extra training that they need to do between drill weekends. But that expectation is there. They want to be part of the Army, and this is a profession. We expect them to find time through their day to go out and do that physical training that's required to be physically fit and to be a soldier.
But even in the active component, there's somebody yesterday was talking about how there are people who are not being invited back. Basically, they're being not having their contracts renewed because they're so overweight that they can't pass the test. Yeah, it's a lot to go from being able to pass the test to not being able to pass the test in a year, right? So it's
right, and that's an issue, really personal control. And you've signed up, nobody forced you, this is an all-volunteer Army. You opted to join the military through the basic training and then initial training on your MOS, your skill set. You were forced, whether you wanted to or not, to do physical training. And then as an Army Reserve soldier, you have to do it on your own. Many gyms and other places you can go to, but you don't need there's no cost involved in getting down and doing push-ups on commercials during a sitcom on television. There's plenty of things. You can stick your feet under the front end of a sofa and do some sit-ups on a commercial break, if nothing else. But you have to get out and you have to move. That's just the nature of the beast. If we do have soldiers that don't make their height-weight criteria or they fail a physical fitness test, we work with them. We give them all kinds of opportunities to come in line with it. As long as they are making reasonable progress towards losing weight or moving towards passing a physical fitness test, we work with them. But those that for 4 and 5 years continue to gain weight and continue to fail a physical fitness test, as we're downsizing, we're looking for the best of the best, they're helping themselves to leave the military, unfortunately.
So we're at the AUSA show, and so if you haven't been doing physical fitness any other time, there is, right before the show starts, the Army 10-miler, which you ran in. That's a pretty long race, and you ran with a gentleman, a soldier who is an amputee. Can you tell us about that? That kind of thing just always kind of gets my spine tingly with sort of, I'm not sure that I would be able to do that. It takes a lot of courage, I think. But
well, part of the role as a senior leader in the Army Reserve is going out and meeting with the wounded warriors. And we met Sergeant Burgess a year ago, Sergeant Dan Burgess, and he lost his right leg in Afghanistan to an IED. And he was challenged a year ago at the Army 10-miler. That was my third straight. This is my fourth one. A year ago, the then CSM of the Army Reserve, Sergeant Major Schultz, invited him, challenged him, if you will, to run the 10-miler this year. And so Sergeant Burgess has been down in San Antonio at Brooke Army Medical Hospital and has been recovering. And so he's been training specifically to come back up here and do that 10-miler. And I will tell you, it was a challenge. We did not go fast, but we finished as a team. He had to stop a number of times, and with the stump on his right leg, he had to change the sock and fittings because his stump would swell and contract, and so the prosthetic device was not fitting properly along the way. But he was bound and determined, and through some cajoling, some playing mom, and other people on the team, somewhat getting in the good Army fashion, probably like a Marine as well, being very pushy and sometimes obnoxious with him to continue to challenge him to get through the 10 miles. His wife and 2 kids were waiting there for him at the finish line. They were excited, and he was so pleased that he met this personal challenge. And he's actually continuing on. He's going to go over to Vietnam in March of next year and do a 325-mile cycle ride with some Vietnam veterans. So he's continuing on, and he's just, again, like you said, spine tingling. My feet might hurt or something, but or you sometimes feel a little winded. You say, okay, it totally changes your whimper whine quotient significantly when you see people like that step up to the plate.
Now, are you kind of using him in a way as a public relations kind of a person? Because he's obviously not the only soldier who's returned with one leg or less than that. And I would imagine for other guys who are in wheelchairs or have physical challenges that he's got to be a tremendously inspirational guy. Is that part of the program?
It absolutely is. And so we're using much more social media. So General Talley, we made sure that it was out on his Facebook page, on mine, and as well as on the Army Reserve Facebook postings. So we had photos and storylines about Staff Sergeant Burgess. But we're really doing that and asking a lot more of the units to reach out to their wounded warriors so that next year we'll have far more Army Reserve teams that we're running in concert with one or more of the wounded warriors and fielding these teams out. The Army 10 miler, it's always great. And look, I'm 53. I'm not going to be one of those that's going to finish in an hour or less anymore. It used to be all about competing. Now it's about completing. And completing, and it may not be the fastest run in the world to go and run with one of the wounded warriors, but it's far more uplifting than my normal time of about an hour and 45 minutes, which is not fast, but it really isn't. You've got those that are out there that are the stellar Olympic type runners, but the majority of 35,000 people that sign up for the Army 10 miler in concert with the AUSA conference aren't out there to set a land speed record. They're out there really for that Army camaraderie that we have out there.
Those guys who are on the Olympic end of things, I just marvel at that. They're doing 26, if they're doing a marathon, they're doing 26 5-minute miles in a row. And I think if I get out on a track, I can do maybe a lap, quarter of a mile at a 5-minute pace, and then I'm done. It's like, it's going to take me 4 hours to do it. So that it isn't just inspiring that anybody gets through 10 miles. That's a pretty good race. It doesn't have to be the whole marathon.
Right.
So talk a little bit about the overlap or where they come together of physical fitness and mental fitness. You were talking about how mental fitness is kind of a little amorphous.
It is. The mental fitness piece, I think everybody carries their own concept of what that means. What does it mean to be mentally fit? Can you remain focused on a task at hand? Are there things that are affecting you from your personal or even in your workspace that precludes you from being all that you should and could be? So how do you work around the things that make you resilient or don't? And how do you learn to cope with those? I think that over time we've become a bit more insular. We do a lot more texting. We found now that the younger soldiers and the young folks of today would far prefer to text back and forth than actually even be on a telephone conversation or face-to-face. So I think that somehow we found different ways of how to cope, and then how do we then recognize and put those coping mechanisms out there. But in the military, as you know, we can be a bit harsh in some people's mind. But you have to be taught how to deal with very rugged situations, because when bullets are flying, people are getting shot next to you, and perhaps yourself, you can't just sit down and shoot a text to somebody. You have to make an instantaneous decision on what's happening. And unless we instill those kind of coping mechanisms in our soldiers, we will not maintain the greatest military. So sometimes people may think we're a little bit mean-spirited, but I would argue that sometimes that tough love is absolutely necessary within the military.
Well, it's not abusive. I mean, you just as you were talking about with the sergeant running the 10 miler. I mean, yes, there's going to be some, come on, some pushing ahead a little bit, but I never never thought it was going to be really outrageously. Boot camp is a different story, but that's what they're supposed to do. But yeah, so a little bit more about, are you involved in the training of the resilient skills? There are 14 resilient skills, right?
Yes, absolutely. We make sure that we go out and we talk with the different soldiers as well as the master resilient trainers and get that kind of piece for the senior leaders so that we understand what are the pieces that we're really trying to instill. And I will say we rebrand, you know, a rose is a rose by whatever name we call it, whether it's ready and resilient or, you know, being Army strong. How do we get that information out to the soldiers? How do we make sure that they have the capacity and the networking and that safety net of knowing that if I have an issue, if I come forward to somebody within my leadership chain and I share with them, this is a problem that is really affecting me, I'm not going to be treated adversely as a result of it. It is as it is with a parent. You know, there are times when raising boys, they would come in upset with each other or have a slightly bloodied knee, and rather than fawn all over them, sometimes it's good for them to say, hey, go wash it off yourself and learn how to cope with those kinds of things. And I think we've continued to do that with the soldiers. We want to sometimes put it back in their lap, but we also have to, as leaders, recognize when it's something you absolutely cannot give back to them. You've got to actually get your arms around and share that, oh, that's terrible, and how do we now fix the problem that you have as a group and not leave it on somebody's lap. One of the biggest things I think we've done now is encourage soldiers and leaders to understand it's okay if there are certain aspects that you know yourself you're not able to assist. It's just something that you can't buy into for whatever reason. On the civilian side, I'm a nurse. And I know that when we first had the HIV and AIDS issues as healthcare providers, they recognized that some of the nurses and doctors were uncomfortable, absolutely uncomfortable, and felt it was immoral to ask us to provide care to people with HIV and AIDS. So there were pieces that were put aside that said, okay, if you absolutely cannot, we have to accept that and recognize that you have the inability to provide practice and care to those individuals. And I think some people within the military recognize that for whatever reason there's something in their makeup and complexion that says, I don't know how to help that soldier with a particular issue. So, but they have to know, let me find another soldier that can provide that support. And it's the same thing I think we did in the healthcare arena.
Looking back at the individual soldiers, when I was researching a book, came across a quote by then Secretary Gates, who was talking about how they want to change things, and he said, I still remember this, that the Department of Defense will no longer hold it against a service member to access mental health services, which kind of is a nice thing to say, but it also, in a way, everybody who felt that their security clearances were in jeopardy just says, hey, I told you, because they were doing it until now. And I know that the Army has been talking about taking that stigma away from it, but is that message getting through to people? Are people asking for the help that they need?
I think more and more people are asking for help, and as an intel soldier, certainly with a top secret clearance, I can understand the concern because it takes away our livelihood. And as an Army Reserve soldier, if you also are working as a intel analyst on the civilian side, once they strip that clearance away from you or put it on hold, you've lost all of your livelihood. So until people were absolutely certain that they could seek mental health services without any financial repercussions or the stigma that seems to go along with that, I think we've made great headway. But even as an entire society, there is still some negativity that's applied to people that seek mental health services, and that's wrong. We have to make sure that certainly our soldiers, that whether they're suffering from PTSD or any other type of issue, the stressors within their civilian or military side of the house, if they want to seek assistance, they should know that they have the safety net to do that.
Okay, the last thing of all, I was saving it for last. So when I was in the Marine Corps, I mentioned this before, I was never really quite sure what warrant officers do and what their jobs are, and you mentioned that there's some confusion. So I just tell everybody what you guys do.
That's always a good question. I run into a number of general officers that will come to me now and admit readily that I still don't really know what I'm supposed to do. No, it isn't just you. Sometimes I'll argue, sometimes it's the warrant officers as well. Our jobs are as subject matter experts in specific lanes. As an example, within just the intelligence branch, there are 8 MOSs or skill sets that we expect our warrant officers. There's 8 different MOSs that we have. So there's 17 branches that have warrant officers, everything from CID agents to boat warrants that can skipper very large boats, and those are commanded by warrant officers. So systems integrators, the technicians, those people that look at the nuts and bolts pieces but at the strategic level is really where the warrant officer fits in. The commissioned officer or the O grade, your captains, majors, colonels, and so forth, they really have become much more broad spectrum, and they deal with so many staff issues and not so much the systems that are part of the Army. And so that's our job. Our role is to make sure that systems, as an example, let's say we have engineer units and then we have engineer equipment. Well, our warrant officers started being the mechanics on the engines and repairing big caterpillars, big lifts and cranes and so forth. And over time then they've morphed into the overseer, the purveyor, if you will, of what all of the soldiers that work on all of those pieces of equipment. So we look forward to what's the new equipment that's coming into that particular branch. How do we make sure all of the soldiers in that area are trained specifically for upcoming equipment pieces? And how do we make sure that as software changes, how do we order new parts? How do we make sure that everything continues? And we make sure the Army continues to roll. And those pieces, but we absolutely, as my example with working with General Talley, making sure that I support all of his visions and initiatives and continue to push those down then to the other command chief warrant officers we have in the Army Reserve.
So you're really the backbone of the Army then?
No. The NCOs are absolutely, and that's where we come from. Almost all of us were NCOs once upon a time. So that leadership perspective of what the NCOs were, we just leverage. It's like we're not the NCO Corps. We'd like to think we help make the NCO Corps a little bit better because we fed from them. That's where we all came from. But we make sure that they have all of the tools and sets and to do the training to make sure everything is right. And they run the Army, not us.
Command Chief Warrant Officer Phyllis Wilson, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.